the Federal Bureau deployed a tactical asset that entirely shatters the myth of a spotless crime scene. Fingerprints are unnecessary. Confessions mean nothing. The perpetrator does not even need a prior police record. Investigating Nancy Guthrie's vanishing from Pima County, Arizona, the agency unleashed a biological tracking system. This technology hunts perpetrators by quietly sifting through their innocent relatives' genetic code. Somewhere out there, a distant relative likely submitted saliva to an ancestry database, simply hoping to trace familial roots. That civilian remains blissfully unaware of the triggered chain reaction. They cannot fathom that uncovering their heritage just handed investigators the ultimate case breakthrough. CeCe Moore, head genetic genealogist at Virginia's Parabon NanoLabs, recently stared deadpan into the camera. She targeted her warning at the disguised intruder, who snatched 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie from her Catalina Foothills residence. The delivery was sharp and calculated. She stated if she were the kidnapper, she would be experiencing profound terror, because through the ruthless precision of genetic genealogy, the culprit's unmasking is an absolute guarantee. Capture is certain. Step inside the investigative mind and follow the cold science. Here, we anchor ourselves to physical proof, stripping away sensationalist noise and baseless speculation. Our focus remains locked entirely on the true forensic timeline, exploring these grim realities consistently. If this chilling saga captivates you, as massive public interest suggests, register your engagement with this deep dive now. Amplifying this narrative gives justice vital momentum. Navigating this darkness, keep one haunting thought firmly in mind. Anyone mailing their DNA to an ancestry corporation unknowingly became an active operative in hunting this exact criminal. That dragnet includes you. Consider the psychological weight of that reality. We must dissect that chilling paradigm, balancing moral implications with rigid scientific data. Rewind to the origin point. The victim resided within Tucson's secluded Catalina Foothills enclave. It is a profoundly peaceful community resting in the imposing shadow of the Santa Catalina Mountains. While being the mother of television journalist Savannah Guthrie thrusts her into the spotlight, medically and legally, she remains an incredibly fragile senior citizen. Her survival depends entirely upon a strict pharmaceutical regimen. Her failing heart requires a surgically implanted pacemaker. When Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos addressed the media during his February 3rd briefing, he made it clear she lacked the stamina to travel 50 yards unassisted. This completely negates the theory of an elderly woman wandering into the dark under her own power. As dusk fell on January 31st, 2026, she shared a normal meal with family. Her son-in-law transported her back, dropping her at the door around 9:50 at night, Mountain Time. That marks the final confirmed sighting of her alive. The ensuing terror was logged by an emotionless electronic timeline. Her property's automated devices silently cataloged the intrusion. At 1:47 in the morning, on February 1st, an unseen hand disabled her doorbell. At 2:12 in the morning, another security sensor triggered a motion alert, yet the visual feed remained dark. The darkest digital footprint struck at 2:28 in the morning, when her pacemaker's remote application abruptly disconnected. At 2:36 in the morning, an exterior lens 2.5 miles away caught a blurred automobile accelerating furiously. Only at midday, after mysteriously missing a scheduled virtual religious gathering, were authorities finally notified of her vanishing. Investigators quickly discovered the victim's blood smeared across the entryway. Soon after, federal agents declassified haunting video of a concealed phantom. Equipped with a heavy pack, a holstered firearm, and thick gloves, the figure dismantled her external security before dawn on February 1st. The true identity of this heavily armed prowler remains a tightly guarded secret, at least for now. Law enforcement leadership explicitly ruled out the relatives as suspects following exhaustive interrogations and thorough vetting. Investigative crosshairs have locked onto the microscopic organic traces carelessly discarded around the property. Within these microscopic cellular fragments, the entire pursuit of justice now breathes. The attacker suffered the fatal delusion that thick fabrics and pitch-black night would render them a forensic ghost. A catastrophic miscalculation. We constantly shed pieces of ourselves, skin flakes clinging to doorknobs, genetic residue on glass, exhaled moisture, or a solitary follicle. Furthermore, this was not the intruder's first time scouting the perimeter. Intelligence verified the disguised entity was recorded prowling the estate days prior. noticeably lacking their weapon and tactical gear during that recon. Multiple incursions guarantee more shed cellular debris. The lingering doubt is no longer whether genetic evidence exists. The lingering mystery revolves around exactly what it takes to manifest that microscopic trace of biology into a living, breathing identity. The revelation that answers this stands as the most monumental forensic breakthrough in the entire history of the investigation. Let us examine the mechanics of this process. Step by deliberate step. Whenever detectives secure biological material from a crime scene, its initial destination is inevitably the combined DNA index system, universally known as CODIS. Serving as the national genetic repository for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, it remains one of the most formidable investigative arsenals ever constructed. Housed within its digital walls are nearly 27 million unique biological signatures, with over 19 million belonging directly to individuals already convicted of criminal offenses. It operates with ruthless efficiency. The moment a biological specimen is properly extracted and uploaded into the network, a definitive answer can emerge in barely 24 hours. Yet, this marvel of modern policing suffers from a fatal flaw. It operates entirely as a closed ecosystem. The database can only shine a light on those who have already passed through the shadow of the criminal justice system. Should the phantom stalking Nancy Guthrie have spent a lifetime evading handcuffs, or managed to avoid a conviction for a qualifying felony, and never submitted to a court-mandated cheek swab, their biological footprint is effectively non-existent within the federal archives. During the relentless pursuit of Guthrie's captor, detectives fed two distinct biological specimens into the system. Both exhaustive inquiries yielded the exact same chilling result: absolute silence, without a single match. First came the discarded glove, discovered roughly 2 miles from the sprawling Guthrie property. An item, federal agents noted, bore a striking resemblance to the handwear sported by the intruder, captured on the security camera. The database offered no identity, and investigators eventually linked those microscopic traces to a nearby restaurant worker, who held absolutely zero connection to the abduction. Then came the genetic material harvested from deep within, the very walls of the victim's residence, a signature matching neither Nancy nor anyone permitted on the premises. Yet again, the federal repository drew a blank. Faced with a dead end in the National Registry, the entire trajectory of the manhunt violently pivoted away from orthodox criminology and plunged into the cutting-edge realm of investigative genetic genealogy, shifting the focus entirely onto the perpetrator's ancestral lineage. Standard forensic testing, the foundational bedrock of the federal system, isolates roughly 20 distinct chromosomal locations. While this handful of loci is more than enough to confirm, with chilling certainty, if a droplet of blood belongs to a suspect already sitting in an interrogation room, it lacks the sheer data density required to conjure an unknown phantom out of thin air. This new ancestral science, however, plays out on a staggeringly massive canvas. By scrutinizing upward of 500,000 markers scattered across the human genome, this methodology constructs an intricately detailed genetic mosaic. Crucially, this forensic blueprint is not designed to point a finger directly at the culprit. Instead, it acts as something far more insidious and incredibly potent. It forms a biological compass that exposes hidden bloodlines, branching out to distant relatives, third, fourth, or even fifth cousins, people who might share a mere 1% of their biological makeup with the monster in question. Dwell on the terrifying implications of that fact for a moment. Deep within your cells, you carry the secrets of blood relatives you have never spoken to, individuals residing in distant zip codes you have never once set foot in. These are everyday citizens who innocently spat into a plastic tube 3 years prior, driven by nothing more than a casual curiosity about their ethnic heritage. Suddenly, every single one of those curious consumers morphs into a glowing beacon on the radar, hunting Nancy Guthrie's abductor. The intruder undoubtedly operated under the illusion of total invisibility, shielded by a pristine criminal record. What they critically underestimated was the distant relative who casually mailed off a cheek swab to a commercial lab as a quirky holiday present. Now, the walls are closing in, propelled by the ancestral data of millions who carelessly surrendered their biological blueprints, completely oblivious to how those harmless kits would eventually seal the fate of a masked predator lurking on the porch of an 84-year-old victim at exactly 1:47 in the morning. CeCe Moore, the lead ancestral investigator at Parabon NanoLabs, delivered a chillingly blunt assessment during a national television broadcast. She stated unequivocally that if she were the one who orchestrated this abduction, pure terror would be setting in right about now. She emphasized that through this new ancestral science, unmasking the phantom is no longer a mere possibility, nor is it a statistical probability. It is, quite simply, an impending certainty. The historical triumphs of this methodology are completely unassailable, demanding our closest scrutiny, as they perfectly illuminate the inescapable trap currently closing around the figure at the center of the Guthrie mystery. The psychological weight of what is coming for them is best understood by looking at the watershed moment that transformed ancestral tracking into the ultimate prosecutorial weapon, the hunt for the Golden State Killer. For a horrifying decade, Joseph James DeAngelo orchestrated a reign of terror, butchering at least 13 innocent souls and violating over 50 victims scattered across the Californian landscape from 1974 until 1986. For over 30 agonizing years, he existed only as an elusive phantom, slipping effortlessly through every federal dragnet. Detectives were left holding empty files, stymied by an enigma that brutally outmaneuvered every traditional tactic in the police handbook. Then, in 2018, a desperate squad of investigators quietly fed a biological artifact recovered from those decades-old slaughterhouses into GEDmatch, a publicly accessible ancestral database that permits police queries. Instantly, the digital web snagged onto the profile of a distant family member. From that single, fragile thread, researchers meticulously constructed a sprawling genealogical canopy. Slowly, relentlessly, they pruned the dead ends. The sweeping canopy ultimately narrowed down to a single, solitary leaf. The most prolific predator in state history had spent decades hiding perfectly in plain sight, wearing the very badge of a sworn police officer. The Phantom of California had slipped into a quiet, unremarkable retirement in Citrus Heights, hiding in plain sight. His undoing came down to a single piece of garbage, a casually tossed tissue pulled from his trash bins, holding the biological signature that cemented his identity. By April of 2018, authorities finally placed Joseph James DeAngelo in handcuffs. Admitting to a horrific string of homicides, he was ultimately condemned to spend his remaining days behind bars, stripped of any chance at freedom. This exact scientific breakthrough, the invisible net that caught a serial predator, is currently analyzing the microscopic traces left inside Nancy Guthrie's residence, echoing another modern tragedy. Consider the chilling massacre at the University of Idaho on November 13, 2022, which forever tied Bryan Kohberger to infamy. In the dead of night, a blade claimed the lives of 4 young scholars, Kaylee Goncalves, Madison Mogan, Zana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin within the walls of their off-campus sanctuary in Moscow, Idaho. A discarded leather blade cover yielded a microscopic suspect profile, yet running those biological markers through the National Criminal Database returned absolute silence. Detectives pivoted to ancestral mapping, spinning a complex web of relatives derived purely from the cellular debris left on that metal snap. The sprawling lineage inevitably funneled down to one specific household residing in Pennsylvania. Law enforcement agents vanished into the shadows outside the Kohberger residence, silently watching their target before making their move. Following the textbook playbook for ancestral sleuthing, agents quietly secured the household's discarded waste. A mundane cotton swab plucked from the refuse perfectly aligned the genetic stars, leading to Bryan Kohberger's capture on the 30th of December, 2022. He formally surrendered to the overwhelming evidence on the 2nd of July, 2025, confessing to a quadruple homicide. Judgment fell heavily on July 23, 2025, 4 back-to-back life sentences erasing any hope of release, compounded by a 10-year penalty for unlawful entry. A deadly narrative reconstructed from a forgotten sheath, finalized by a discarded bathroom swab thousands of miles away. This is the relentless, inescapable reality of modern ancestral tracking, and it is the exact ghost hunting the shadowy figure in the Guthrie investigation. Cloaked in anonymity, the intruder operated under the illusion that facial coverings and covered fingertips guaranteed absolute invisibility. What they failed to calculate was the silent shedding of their own biology across a crime scene they had brazenly stalked time and again. Their eventual downfall is encoded into their very bloodstream. While scientists meticulously chart this microscopic blueprint, the journey from physical swab to a named suspect remains fraught with friction. Grasping the true weight of these scientific hurdles is absolutely vital for the public trying to make sense of the delay. These complications illuminate why detectives are pacing their maneuvers and dictate the intensely cautious protocols surrounding the forensic material. The most glaring challenge originates from the actual composition of the biological material pulled from the scene. Sheriff Chris Nanos of Pima County openly admitted that the genetic fragments lifted from Nancy's domain are hopelessly intertwined into a complex mixture. Such blended profiles are a forensic tangled web, fusing the victim's cellular signature with the faint, lingering ghosts of their attacker. Compounding the chaos are the innocent echoes of daily life relatives, maintenance crews, and welcome guests who all unknowingly left their own invisible marks. Untangling this biological knot to isolate a solitary killer hinges entirely upon a single, merciless metric. It comes down to a battle of percentages. How much of the intruder's genetic code survived against the overwhelming noise of the rest? Veteran American forensic pioneer Colleen Fitzpatrick, possessing a lifetime of ancestral sleuthing expertise, broke down this harsh reality. When a swab yields 90% of the victim's biology and merely 10% of the assailants, those killers' breadcrumbs are often too faint to feed into the vast ancestral databases. This limitation has nothing to do with flawed laboratory equipment or failing software. It is simply the cold, unyielding nature of environmental forensics out in the chaotic real world. Enter Barbara Rae-Venter, the brilliant mind whose ancestral mapping directly unmasked the Golden State Killer. She observed that law enforcement's cryptic warnings hint at a frustrating imbalance. The victim's cellular footprint is likely drowning out the assailant's faint signature. Yet, stepping deeper into the scientific community, a profound sense of cautious optimism begins to emerge. Industry titan CeCe Moore from Parabon NanoLabs addressed the specific complexities of the Guthrie evidence during a prominent television interview. Her message was clear. Tangled biological webs have been successfully unraveled by her team time and time again. She did concede that separating these cellular blends demands an exhausting layer of high-level algorithmic processing. Once the raw data hits the servers, digital biodetectives must painstakingly carve the predator's unique sequence away from the innocent static. However, she offered a profound silver lining. The mere existence of a corrupted sample fuels her optimism. Finding foreign cellular matter proves one undeniable fact: the phantom slipped up, shedding a quantifiable piece of themselves in the darkness. The legendary investigator's final assessment was delivered without a single trace of hesitation. Should the attacker's microscopic footprint overpower the surrounding noise, scientists possess the digital scalpels required to isolate their identity. The faceless intruder will, inevitably, be dragged into the light. This brings us to David Middleman, the chief executive of Othram, the pioneering Texas facility whose ancestral mapping proved vital in the Idaho student massacre. We must acknowledge a chilling reality about the year 2026. The sheer speed of scientific advancement has vastly outpaced the bureaucratic red tape meant to govern it. Detectives today can extract profound truths from microscopic traces of genetic material, minuscule fragments that experts would have dismissed as entirely worthless just a half-decade prior. But the bottleneck here is no longer the capability of the science itself. Rather, a creeping dread within the investigative community points toward a vastly different problem. The true anxiety stems not from the physical nature of the biological trace left behind, but from the highly scrutinized destination chosen for its analysis. After the National Criminal Database yielded nothing but absolute silence, the path forward became starkly evident to those working the case. The mandate was to forward the biological remnants to the nation's premier genetic intelligence facilities, meticulously preparing the suspect's genomic sequence for deep ancestral tracking. From there, the digital blueprint would be fed into open-source repositories, systematically mapping out the intricate branches of an unknown killer's lineage. Tucked away in Quantico, Virginia, the federal government's primary crime laboratory stands as the undisputed pinnacle of domestic forensic mastery. Industry professionals revere this institution for its flawlessly engineered infrastructure, a battle-tested conduit explicitly designed to translate microscopic cellular data into sprawling ancestral maps. This federal fortress is hardly new to the complex theater of utilizing cutting-edge genomic hunting techniques. Furthermore, their rigid methodologies for disentangling contaminated genetic mixtures, securing evidence integrity, and surviving brutal courtroom scrutiny remain the most fiercely validated standards in America. Recognizing the gravity of the Nancy Guthrie homicide, federal authorities issued an official demand to take possession of the critical physical clues, specifically a discarded glove and the killer's genetic residue, for immediate, high-level analysis. Yet, in a move that stunned onlookers, the presiding sheriff of Pima County outright rejected the federal government's offer. Instead, this invaluable biological material was shipped across the country to a privately operated facility situated down in Florida. Records indicate this specific independent contractor already enjoyed a lucrative, pre-existing financial arrangement with the local sheriff's department. Ultimately, funneling the evidence through this private corporate channel drained an approximate $200,000 from local taxpayer funds. When news of this diversion broke, the response from veteran scientists was jarringly severe, stripped of the usual diplomatic phrasing common in their field. To be clear, the whispered fears haunting the investigation do not revolve around whether the contracted technicians in the Southeast lack basic professional competence. The true controversy lies in whether their internal mechanisms for untangling degraded, multi-source genetic material can genuinely rival the extraordinary, seamless capabilities housed within Quantico. Hanging over this procedural gamble is a terrifying, immutable law of microscopic biology. Conventional extraction methods, specifically the standard short tandem repeat profiling, inherently destroy the very physical matter they seek to analyze. In the act of pulling the vital identifying markers from the biological trace, the chemical procedure literally obliterates the host material. Once that microscopic universe is exhausted, there is no turning back the clock. The foundational evidence is permanently erased from existence. A grim hypothetical emerges. If detectives ran standard testing before committing to advanced ancestral tracking, the sheer act of conventional analysis might have annihilated the remaining traces. Without setting aside an adequate biological reserve for deeper genomic mapping, the crucial genetic footprint may have been irreversibly degraded, meaning the single greatest weapon in modern criminal hunting was potentially rendered useless before it could ever be deployed. This represents a catastrophic error in judgment, far more troubling than any whisper of malicious intent. Top-tier analysts fear this solitary administrative choice might have brutally slammed the door on justice, sabotaging the exact technological avenue engineered to finally unmask the killer, though the sheriff quickly stepped in front of cameras to justify his pivot. He reasoned that the privately contracted southern facility already possessed the comprehensive catalog of reference genomes related to the crime scene. This included the exclusionary samples taken from relatives and verified associates, arguing that dividing the biological clues across dual jurisdictions would invite chaotic discrepancies. From a purely administrative standpoint, keeping the entire puzzle under one roof carries a certain logical weight. Yet, a chorus of retired federal executives has loudly condemned the strategy, branding it as a devastating miscalculation in an unforgiving game. When analyzing a mystery where every passing second and every microscopic cell are infinitely precious commodities, the debate over past choices quickly becomes irrelevant. The only reality that matters now is the horizon ahead, driven entirely by complex digital archives, relentless algorithms, and a technological juggernaut that cannot be halted. The inaugural phase requires fabricating a deeply complex biological blueprint from the killers left behind, traces a construct vastly more intricate than the rudimentary snapshot used in national registries. What researchers build here is an incredibly exhaustive genetic map, capable of interrogating hundreds of thousands of microscopic signposts hidden deep within human cells. Bringing this invisible architecture to light demands not only phenomenally sophisticated machinery, but the brilliant minds trained to interpret its secrets. A prominent Virginia institution has practically cornered the market on this exact science. Once their intricate decoding is complete, the second phase begins by injecting the data into specific ancestral networks that legally tolerate police scrutiny. However, a crippling psychological shadow looms over this process. The sheer legal restriction dictating exactly which digital oceans the authorities are allowed to fish in. Currently, detectives are legally corralled into utilizing just 3 specific platforms for their deep ancestral hunting operations. When pooled together, these heavily restricted digital vaults harbor less than 2 million individual genetic signatures. Meanwhile, the towering commercial behemoths of the industry, some hoarding upward of 25 million unique genetic blueprints, remain entirely off limits. Another massive corporate entity tightly guards a staggering 12 million ancestral records, actively blocking any and all police intrusion. Shielding themselves behind fierce consumer confidentiality agreements, they have effectively locked the doors, a reality that the field's foremost genetic pioneer has addressed with sobering clarity. Speaking to national media, she laid out the haunting truth. If detectives were granted the key to those gargantuan corporate vaults, unmasking this phantom could happen with terrifying, almost instantaneous speed. We are not witnessing a breakdown in modern machinery, but rather a profound lag where bureaucratic policy trails far behind scientific capability. This very friction is what prompted federal agents to step out of the shadows and beg for civilian intervention. They need the public's help to unravel this mystery. If you have ever submitted a saliva sample to a mainstream commercial database, be it AncestryDNA, 23andMe, or MyHeritage, you hold the power to extract your raw genetic blueprint and willingly surrender it to open-source registries like GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA. These specific portals offer a simple toggle switch, an opt-in feature that essentially grants detectives permission to hunt through your ancestral past in pursuit of a predator. Your seemingly insignificant genetic code might just be the vital, missing branch that finally links investigators to the dark roots of the perpetrator's bloodline. The Bureau is practically pleading. A woman's life remains unaccounted for in this sprawling, active mystery. If your sequence is already out there and you genuinely wish to offer tangible assistance in bringing Nancy Guthrie home, this is the absolute best way to do so. The third phase of this hunt begins the moment a distant cousin triggers an alarm in the system, the painstaking descent into ancestral mapping. Here, cold algorithms step aside, and human intuition becomes the deciding factor between a cold case and a captured phantom. Specialists meticulously construct a sprawling web of relatives anchored to that single matching profile, tracing the bloodline both backward into the forgotten past and forward into the present day. They sift through the mundane detritus of human existence, archived census logs, faded obituaries, public filings, and the somber certificates marking life and death, weaving these together with modern digital footprints and deep historical archives to pinpoint the very individual who left their microscopic signature behind at the scene. This is not a Hollywood montage that wraps up in seconds. It demands an obsessive level of skill and an almost agonizing amount of patience. It relies on fragmented, decaying documents from bygone eras. Furthermore, pioneering expert CeCe Moore has highlighted a chilling variable in this specific hunt, one that could drastically dictate how fast the net closes. The velocity of investigative genetic genealogy hinges almost entirely on a single, uncontrollable element: the ethnic heritage of the phantom they are chasing. Moore has broken down this unsettling reality with clinical precision across various public discussions. Should the unknown subject hail from a long line of early American settlers of Northwest European descent, the digital vaults are already overflowing with the genetic markers of their distant kin. Second and third cousins are lying in wait within the servers, allowing the puzzle to snap together with terrifying speed. As Moore herself articulated, if the individual in question happens to be Caucasian, with generations of history on American soil, their mask could be ripped away in a matter of mere minutes, or, at most, a few hours. However, if the perpetrator is the product of recent immigration, or if their ancestors lived primarily on foreign soil, the digital pool shrinks drastically, leaving investigators grasping at shadows. Unearthing that crucial ancestral tie transforms from a brisk sprint into an arduous, grinding marathon. Barbara Rae-Venter, the architect behind the unmasking of the infamous Golden State Killer, drew attention to a deeply tragic layer of this technological blind spot concerning African American lineages. She observed that tracing Black heritage often crashes into a devastating historical barrier at the dawn of emancipation, an era roughly hovering around 1863, where the systematic documentation of distinct family units essentially vanishes into the abyss of unrecorded history. We must understand that this is not a flaw in the science of genetics. It is the lingering echo of profound human cruelty. The intentional erasure of identities and familial bonds during slavery has bled directly into today's modern crime labs. Consequently, the pace and success rate of these cutting-edge genetic hunts are inherently stripped of racial neutrality. They are a grim reflection of a deeply prejudiced past. The detectives working this puzzle are well aware of the disparity. They factor it into their calculations, yet it stands as an undeniable hurdle dictating the clock of this investigation. The fourth act in this psychological theater is the quiet act of confirmation. When the ancestral web finally tightens around a single name or a remarkably small cluster of targets, law enforcement shifts into the shadows to harvest biological material unseen. They stalk their prey, waiting for a piece of refuse to fall from the suspect's orbit. A discarded coffee cup, a flicked cigarette butt, a crumpled napkin, or a piece of garbage pulled from a curb. This stealthily acquired trophy is then rushed to a lab to see if it mirrors the sinister blueprint left at the crime scene. This clandestine maneuver is the exact strategy that finally locked the cuffs on Joseph James DeAngelo, ending the reign of the Golden State Killer. It is the precise methodology that ensnared Bryan Kohberger. Utilizing a discarded cotton swab fished from his father's garbage bin in Pennsylvania. The moment that microscopic match is verified, the trap springs shut. This is the unyielding machine of justice. It is happening right now, gears turning silently in the background. We no longer wonder if the method is viable. The chilling uncertainty lies solely in whether the biological fragments recovered in this particular nightmare are pristine enough to see the sequence through to its end. Yet, a fresh, deeply unsettling twist has surfaced in the narrative, one that demands our closest scrutiny. According to inside sources speaking to CNN, federal agents are quietly holding on to a chilling image. A photograph capturing the phantom lurking on the Guthrie grounds, well before the evening she vanished. In this haunting still, the intruder is noticeably devoid of the backpack they later carried. Furthermore, the menacing firearm holster, so glaringly obvious in the doorbell footage from the night Nancy was taken, is entirely absent. This seemingly minor detail cracks the forensic profile wide open in two distinct directions. Primarily, it solidifies the darkest suspicions already held by criminal profilers analyzing the psychological footprint. The predator was stalking the terrain, conducting quiet surveillance long before making their move. This was no crime of passion. It was a coldly calculated, premeditated strike. The captor studied their victim. They memorized the environment. They had stood on that very soil previously. Secondly, and this is the crux of the entire genetic manhunt, each and every time a predator breaches a victim's sanctuary, they risk leaving behind a microscopic piece of themselves. Dead skin flakes drift onto countertops. Invisible droplets of breath coat the air. A palm brushes against a cold iron gate. A shadowed figure leans breathing against a pane of glass. A mere touch in the dark leaves an invisible, undeniable genetic signature. If the predator stalked the Guthrie residence repeatedly, they unwittingly painted the scene with their own biological echoes. This complex, intertwined DNA recovered from the crime scene is not just a hurdle, it is a profound opportunity. Woven into those samples could be the phantom's repeated genetic footprint, layered over several chilling visits. Forensic bioinformaticians, untangling these complex genetic webs, note that every successive microscopic drop acts as a powerful amplifier, sharpening the perpetrator's faint signal amidst the noise. The laboratory must now decode whatever silent clues remain. The secrets harbored there might be far richer than anyone first assumed. What are the psychological implications of our biology serving as a permanent forensic ledger? Millions of individuals who mailed off a simple cheek swab made what they thought was a harmless choice. They willingly surrendered their most intimate biological blueprints, handing over the essence of their identity to corporate databases. In return, they marveled at ancestry maps and connected with long-lost cousins. They unearthed fascinating family histories, entirely unaware that law enforcement might one day be looking over their shoulders. Scarcely anyone considered the chilling reality that an unknown, distant relative branching off their family tree might step out of the shadows and commit an unspeakable atrocity. Yet, this phantom web now surrounds us all, whether we acknowledge it or not. The open-source platform GEDmatch, a quiet hunting ground for authorities, has long stood at the volatile crossroads of genetic privacy and absolute justice. Back in 2018, when detectives famously weaponized the database to unmask the Golden State Killer, the site possessed no formal gateway for police intrusion. Even the FBI has confronted this murky ethical territory, formally acknowledging the friction in court filings surrounding the Kohberger investigation. They conceded that digital dragnets had swept up the profiles of innocent individuals who never once consented to be part of a criminal manhunt. Forced into the light, the platform hastily overhauled its rules, pivoting to a strict opt-in model for police access. The psychological friction radiating from this moral battleground is profound, and there are no easy answers waiting in the dark. On one side lies the sacred privacy of millions of everyday citizens who casually shared their DNA, completely blind to the fact that they were building a massive forensic weapon. On the other side of that scale rests an 84-year-old woman, violently abducted from the presumed safety of her own bed in the dead of night. She has vanished into the ether for over 40 agonizing days, leaving behind a family trapped in a living nightmare, jumping at every ring of the phone. The gravity of both arguments demands our absolute attention. Renowned genetic genealogist CeCe Moore, who has spent her career walking this very tightrope, puts it into brilliant perspective. She argues that this groundbreaking science can conjure a ghost from the machine it can hand detectives a name. However, the moment that name materializes, the digital magic ends, and the grueling, traditional footwork of the justice system must take over. It demands ironclad court orders, weeks of covert surveillance, tangible physical proof, and ruthless prosecutorial scrutiny before handcuffs are drawn. Mining the family tree is simply a compass pointing toward the truth. It is a lead generator, not a judge's final gavel. Any phantom unmasked through investigative genetic genealogy is still afforded the uncompromising shield of due process. That distinction matters. While this reality does not magically erase privacy fears, it anchors a futuristic investigative tool to the bedrock of a centuries-old legal code. As the clock ticks on this harrowing investigation, the forensic ledger paints a very specific, chilling picture. Biological traces extracted from Nancy Guthrie's residence yielded 0 hits in the national database. Furthermore, the genetic material is a convoluted mixture. Before any digital bloodhound can be released, the perpetrator's invisible thread must be painstakingly unraveled from the victim's DNA. A solitary glove, discovered barely 2 meters from the crime scene, sent detectives scrambling only to hit a dead end with a local restaurant employee entirely detached from the horror. Investigators bagged a staggering 16 pairs of gloves around the perimeter, though the vast majority merely belonged to desperate search crews scouring the desert. Deep inside a private Florida laboratory, scientists relentlessly analyze the physical evidence. While federal authorities officially declare that the genetic hunt is underway, the Pima County Sheriff publicly assured the media that the invisible net is tightening, and they are creeping ever closer to putting a face to the monster. An elite 5-person unit, 4 hardened detectives and their commanding sergeant has been aggressively relocated, setting up a war room inside the FBI's Tucson headquarters. This case is anything but frozen. It currently stands as the most fiercely active forensic battleground in the entire state. The staggering $1.2 million bounty still hangs over the perpetrator's head. Yet, the true vice gripping the suspect isn't the threat of a payout. The ultimate pressure radiates from 500,000 microscopic genetic markers, silently mapping a digital cage around their family tree. With agonizing precision, that invisible dragnet is slowly, inevitably, closing in. The breaking point of this mystery won't unfold beneath the flashing lights of a televised press briefing. It will happen in the sterile silence of a laboratory, likely in the dead of night when a hidden algorithm aligns, and the phantom's real name finally blinks onto a glowing monitor. In that split second, a ruthless, invisible surveillance operation will be triggered. Detectives will lock onto their target, watching from the shadows, waiting for a single discarded cup or cigarette, the ultimate, condemning piece of the puzzle. A discarded coffee cup, a crushed cigarette butt, a crumpled piece of tissue paper. These are the microscopic breadcrumbs that brought down the Golden State Killer, Joseph James DeAngelo. The exact same scientific methodology that ultimately cornered Bryan Kohberger. It is this very same relentless protocol that investigators are currently weaponizing against the shadow who lingered on Nancy Guthrie's porch at exactly 1:47 in the dead of night. The perpetrator failed to realize that their own ancestry would become their undoing, and it is because the meticulous, crowdsourced deductions happening right here among those following this tragedy, across discussion boards and within the private messages sent my way, have evolved into a formidable, collective forensic task force with undeniable real-world impact. Yet, as we delve deeper into this ongoing manhunt, several chilling anomalies and critical blind spots continue to haunt the investigation. I urge you to share your theories below and lend your analytical minds to these puzzles. The first glaring unknown centers entirely on the compromised genetic mixture. In order for investigative genetic genealogy to yield a viable lead, the perpetrator's biological material must absolutely dominate the gathered sample. Forensic specialists have cautioned that the current evidence might be heavily diluted. However, we know this phantom stalked the residence more than once. Could these repeated intrusions suggest a compounding of biological evidence, leaving behind a much higher concentration of genetic markers than a standard, isolated break-in ever would? For those among you with a background in forensic pathology, how probable is it that detectives have managed to isolate a workable, uncontaminated profile from the scene? Our second unresolved mystery surrounds the jurisdictional tug-of-war between private and federal facilities. Sheriff Nanos publicly justified outsourcing the analysis to a commercial laboratory down in Florida. His defense rested heavily on maintaining an unbroken chain of custody and leveraging their highly specialized, proprietary databases for cross-referencing. Yet, retired federal agents have openly criticized this move as highly irregular and potentially detrimental. Has there been any objective comparison detailing exactly how this private laboratory measures up against the legendary capabilities of Quantico? What have your deep dives into these forensic institutions uncovered? The third enigma focuses on the haunting prelude to the crime. Federal investigators hold an image of this intruder lurking around the estate prior to the kidnapping, notably lacking the tactical backpack and weapon holster seen later. This chilling detail points squarely to calculated surveillance, while drastically increasing the odds that they inadvertently shed more microscopic clues. Have authorities explicitly stated if the swabs taken from the scene encompass these preliminary scouting trips, or just the violent night in question? Differentiating between these timelines is an absolutely vital component in constructing a pristine genetic map. The fourth piece of the puzzle lies hidden within the digital archives. Currently, detectives can only legally comb through roughly 2 million consumer profiles housed on platforms like GEDmatch, Family Tree DNA, and DNA Justice. Meanwhile, the massive commercial genealogy corporations fiercely guard a staggering vault of nearly 40 million genetic blueprints, completely walled off from police intervention. This frustrating roadblock has forced the Bureau into pleading with the public to willingly share their personal data. I have to ask, how many of you tuning in have actually transferred your own genetic blueprints to these open-source platforms following this horrifying abduction? Should enough individuals take this simple step, the mathematical odds of ensnaring this predator will skyrocket exponentially. The fifth and final variable is rooted in human history. Renowned genealogist CeCe Moore bluntly stated that resolving this case hinges entirely on whether the perpetrator stems from deep-rooted American lineage, specifically of Northwest European descent. Looking closely at the meticulous breakdowns you have all conducted on the security video analyzing the suspect's posture, movement patterns, and anatomical proportions, what ethnic origins seem most plausible to you? This is far from reckless internet vigilantism or baseless guessing games. It is a calculated examination of the single most crucial factor dictating how fast the genealogical web can close in on a target. I invite you to dissect these elements in the discussion section below. Your collective intellect has already pierced through much of the fog surrounding this nightmare, and that relentless pursuit of the truth must not stop now. An 84-year-old woman, Nancy Guthrie, was ripped from the safety of her own residence during the suffocating darkness of February 1st, 2026. Crimson stains marked the entrance where she was stolen. Just weeks later, on March 5th, Savannah Guthrie stood before her television audience and fiercely declared her unwavering resilience, vowing to hold on to hope and preserve her core spirit. Those powerful words should be etched into the very foundation of this ongoing pursuit for justice. The reality is, a name belongs to the face behind that mask. And somewhere out there, an unwitting relative, completely oblivious to the horror unfolding, innocently scraped the inside of their mouth, following a holiday gathering 3 years ago. They secured the vial. They dropped it in a mailbox. They patiently anticipated discovering their heritage. They had absolutely no idea they were forging an invisible, inescapable chain. They never could have fathomed that their innocent curiosity would map a direct route to a violent kidnapper. Behind closed doors, the centrifuges are spinning. The sprawling genetic canopy is slowly, methodically taking shape. The monster who abducted Nancy Guthrie operated under the delusion that the pitch-black night, a facial covering, and a pair of gloves would guarantee their anonymity. Yet, they are fundamentally trapped by the very biology pulsing through their veins. The unrelenting force of modern science is already hunting them down. The cardiac device continues to send out its silent beacon. The scientists remain glued to their microscopes. The familial connections are intertwining, tighter by the hour. It is time for Nancy Guthrie to be returned to the light. It is time for her loved ones to be freed from this agonizing limbo. And the definitive truth will ultimately be unraveled one ancestral link, one microscopic chromosome, and one undeniable genetic collision at a time. If the haunting details of this mystery have burrowed into your mind, and if our deep dive into the underlying science has illuminated just how close investigators are to blowing this wide open, ensure you follow our ongoing coverage and activate your alerts so you remain informed on every single breakthrough. Week after week, we plunge into the abyss of unresolved mysteries. We let the cold, hard facts dictate our path. We maintain the utmost reverence for the victims enduring these nightmares, and our pursuit will not cease until the absolute truth is finally dragged out of the shadows. Support this investigation and tell us, have you submitted your genetic blueprint to GEDmatch or Family Tree DNA? If not, the time is now. Federal agents and a desperate family wait while the science sits ready. Your profile could be the vital thread unraveling this mystery. Tell us below, which forensic fragment from today's grim examination leaves the deepest psychological mark? The complex obstacle of mingled DNA, the blocked ancestral archives, or that ominous prior visit hinting at unseen biological traces? The analytical power of this unseen audience matters. It always has. If you harbor secrets regarding Nancy Guthrie's vanishing, contact the FBI at 1-800-CALL-FBI or digitally via tips.fbi.gov. The Pima County Sheriff's Department awaits your call at 520-351-4900. Submit leads anonymously. The Guthrie family pledges $1 million for the truth bringing Nancy back. Added federal and Crime Stopper bounties push the total reward over $1.2 million. This inquiry was constructed with profound respect for Nancy Guthrie and her kin. We aim to dissect evidence and hunt facts, never turning an ongoing nightmare into cheap spectacle. Nancy deserves every forensic weapon, every hushed debate, and every watchful eye summoned to her case. Thank you for treating this grim narrative with the heavy respect it warrants. Nancy Guthrie, 84. The Catalina Foothills of Tucson, Arizona, still lost, still hunted, bring her out of the dark.